All
Yay!
right, how about that?
So, we do this show the first and third Friday of every month. And so we are delighted to have a guest with us this morning. But before we get to our guest, we got a little housekeeping to do. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Babs. How you
How
doing?
are you?
I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks.
I know. Well, some of us go to California and some of us go to Bellevue Road.
Yeah. I did. Lynn and I were in California for a few days, and I taped a podcast out there, Rich Roll's podcast, who was someone I met at the Nantucket Project last year. And
I know that name.
Well, Rich Roll is a famous ultra marathoner.
Yeah, I saw him because he had people
plant-based-
running at 5 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning.
He runs like 100 miles at a time.
I was like, babe, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, but his podcast is watched by he's had 50 million viewers or something like that. It's crazy.
And he's a vegan, right? He's a vegan.
Yeah, plant-based food expert. Yeah, I mean, he obviously didn't interview me about any of that stuff, but I used to do plant-based stuff, but I wasn't eating it, and so that was great, and it'll come out in a few days, and it'll be on all of our websites and our social media and everything. So we'll let everyone know. And
okay,
so that was fun, and we visited my stepdaughter at her college up in Santa Clara, and that was wonderful too.
All right. Shout out to Andrew Kaplan and Lynn Springer.
Yep, our loves. Yep.
Yes, our loves. Hey, y'all. Let's see. So let's get this party going.
Yep.
So we have in our studio today with us Jeffrey Abramowitz, who is Executive Director for Reentry Services for JEVS Human Services in Philadelphia. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's very
I'm so
nice.
excited to be up here.
It's nice to have you here.
It's awesome.
And hi to your significant other. Hello. She's like, I'm not on air. I'll say hi. But
she's taking photographs as we go.
So Jeff was a civil trial lawyer for 20 years before poor choices, and who among us haven't had poor choices, led to federal indictment and a 5-year sentence in a federal prison. And upon his return from prison, he served as the Director of Student Services and Workforce Development for a community learning center and an adult literacy agency, serving Philadelphians who are undereducated, unemployed, or underemployed. So Jeff serves as executive board member of the Coalition on Basic Adult Education, and chairs their Prison Literacy Committee, a member of the Pennsylvania Reentry Council, and chairman of the Housing, Education, Employment, and Development Subcommittee, and co-chair of the Community Engagement Committee for Temple University. Committee for the Philadelphia Reentry Coalition, and co-facilitates the Temple University New Opportunities Workshop, and instructs Temple University Pan-African Community Education Program. That's way cool.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
What don't
That's
you do,
awesome.
Jeffrey? Wouldn't that be a shorter list?
So I'd like to say I don't have a radio show, but I actually have a radio show
I was getting to that.
I was
getting to that. So Jeff hosts the Looking Forward Reentry radio show every Wednesday from 5 to 6 on Philly Cam Radio 106.5, and is the keynote speaker and lecturer around the country on issues of adult education, workforce development, prison reform, and criminal justice. I used to work in workforce development.
Did you really?
And adult ed. So
It's a great place to be.
yeah, it was interesting. Here in New Haven, it's very interesting.
Rewarding.
Adult ed has changed a lot here. We're starting to see younger and younger people. A lot of kids who are coming out of juvenile detention centers and can't go back to high school are going to adult ed. So,
Yeah, that 18 to 24-year-old population.
yeah, that's a
Coming right
growing
from school.
population.
Absolutely.
So Babs, Jeffrey and I are very good friends, and we are both charter members of the White Collar Support Group that meets online on Monday nights. So I see Jeffrey almost every Monday night, but probably a half a dozen times in person. Is that probably right?
Probably.
Yeah. So it's weird, so we see each other all the time, but just not, like where we can reach out and touch.
So talk to us, Jeff, about reentry and adult education and what that looks like now, and what should it look like?
We can go on for hours on this. So, but first, I want to tell you that I think that you say the word reentry, and I think there's a misconception about the word reentry. Reentry to me is just a point in time when someone says, I need to take the next step in my life, and I need to find my path. I need to find what drives me, what makes me passionate. So for me, reentry isn't just about somebody that's just left prison, but oftentimes it's the men and women that have been home for years that just struggle trying to find their path of where to go in life. And that to me is more about what reentry is all about. I think we're coming to a point in time now where we have over 100 million people in the United States that have a criminal background. And we're understanding that there's this labor force of untapped people that have some tremendous talent, but they're not getting hired for one reason, and that's because they made some bad choices in their life. And those choices led to something where they had to learn some lessons from it.
So when you say that, Jeff, are you finding that, as you say that, are corporations and businesses understanding where they are in that, and that this is an untapped resource that they, if they put a little time, money, and effort, could really develop a stronger workforce for themselves?
I think they're starting to. I think businesses are starting to understand that there's some really bright, brilliant, and talented people out there that just because of some choices that they made that gave them a criminal background, that they now, once they come back, that they need that chance, that opportunity to show how they can be productive. And they're finding the value in people that have those skills that can be used by their company back in the workforce. I think the door's starting to open up. I will tell you, just personally, it was a struggle for me. I was a trial lawyer for 20 years. I pretty much had everything. I had a beautiful family, still have a wonderful daughter. I got divorced while I was away, but came home and there's no question that what I had done, and I always say this, I made some poor choices in my life. But Albert Einstein's got a great line. He says, if you're making 10 bad choices a day, you're just not trying hard enough. And it's kind of true, because it's the way we learn in life, is by really trying things and making mistakes.
Yeah, hopefully one of the bad choices wasn't coming on this show, Jeffrey.
I'll let you know in a little while.
So Jeffrey, why don't you take us through your story a little bit? Right?
Yeah. So I was a lawyer in Philadelphia, a senior partner, did a lot of trial work, was licensed in Pennsylvania, also in New Jersey, practiced before most of the federal courts as well as the United States Supreme Court. My job was pretty much to be in a courtroom and try cases, made some choices and did some things that were illegal, moved some money around, and received an indictment. They say the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born, and often people say the day you die.
Yeah.
And I would argue that the second most important day is the day you figure out why you're born. And for me, that happened the day that was March 12th, 2012, that I stood in a courtroom filled with my family, friends, colleagues, judges, lawyers, clients, and stood in front as a defendant.
Sure. And
took an acceptance of responsibility that found me in a federal prison for 5 years. And
that's a good amount of time for white collar crime. Like, did you murder somebody?
No,
it was a white collar crime.
It was a white collar crime.
So that's a lot of time.
What security level were you?
So I was at the lowest security level, but unfortunately, my bid started a little rocky.
Yeah.
And it started rocky because in Philadelphia, you go to the Federal Detention Center, which is a mixed bag.
And for those who don't know prison language, bid means
bid is your time away.
Yes.
So I started my first cellmates were both serving life terms. And so I kind of was thrown to the wolves when I got in. And I knew I wasn't in Kansas anymore when I got into the holding cell that night and stood literally butt naked for about an hour waiting for them to find this jumpsuit for me. And while they were doing that, I was watching two guards argue over who was going to get my suit.
Oh my Lord.
And I was like, whoa, this isn't what I expected.
And there's nothing you can do, right? You just
not
have
really.
to...
I'm behind a wall with no clothes on. So I learned a lot in my time away and so many valuable lessons. But my time was pretty hard time to begin with and really learned the insides of the prison system. But I also realized really quickly that every single person that I was with behind bars was wearing green, and we were all the same. I was no more a lawyer than I was anyone else that was behind the walls. My bid, though, kind of changed as I was going to ask you,
when did it start to shift for you? When did it become, when did you start on the path of redemption and saying, you know what, I can do something a little different here while I'm here?
So I sat in a holding cell that night, and at that very moment, I made myself a promise. And the promise was that I needed to figure out what was happening for two reasons. Number one, I wanted to make sure it never happened again. But number two is I wanted to make sure that I got everything out of this experience as I could and every lesson I could from it. So at that very night, when I was sitting in the holding cell, my very first night, I said, I just need to learn everything. And I did. I read over 1,000 books while I was away. I taught over 50 classes from GED math to public speaking to all these courses. I mean, I made things up just so that I could teach them because there really wasn't anything in the prison that I was at. There weren't any classes that were structured like that were helping men understand how they could better themselves.
Yes.
And then I learned things while I was away. I mean, I learned how to drive a forklift, and I learned how to run a warehouse, and I learned how to change oil in a car. I mean, I really had no idea where the oil was even in my car before I went to prison. And
let's be clear, we're not advocating people to go to prison to get life skills.
No, well, no,
but that's an interesting thing that you were open. Like you didn't sit in your cell and sulk, or you didn't sulk. You like, you know what? I'm gonna learn while I'm here.
But Jeffrey, it feels antithetical to people who haven't been through the experience that the best you can do for yourself is to live in the moment and to be fully present instead of trying to hide from it or not take advantage of this transformative moment in your life. So how does that happen?
Yeah, and it's very inside. I think first it's taking responsibility. And when I say take responsibility, you know, people say, oh, I took a plea bargain, I took responsibility. Not really. Taking responsibility is really looking inside yourself and saying, what am I all about? And what am I passionate about? And what do I want out of my life? And then once you come to that conclusion that I want something more and I want to know what drives me, and what drove me and what I came to find drove me was working with people, trying to help them navigate not only prison, but also their reentry and coming home and getting back on their feet. And that's what made me happy. That's being in a classroom and working with men and women and teaching them math and doing all those things where they got it. You see the light bulbs go off. I realized that was my pathway, and that's where I needed to head. And it really takes self-reflection, Jeff. It's sitting down and saying, you know, I made some bad mistakes, you know, I got to learn from them, and how do I make myself better? So instead of pointing to the guard and saying, you know, he didn't understand, or he did this, or going to a job interview and say they didn't hire me because I was a convicted felon, has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with you taking self-responsibility and saying, okay, what did I do to make that happen, and how can I change it? And when we start taking that kind of responsibility, then we end up stepping up ourselves and getting it and understanding that there's more to life. And I'll tell you, I live in a world now where I wake up with a smile in my heart every day. And it's not just because of the lady sitting next to me. It's also because, you know, I'm very passionate about what I do. And it's because I believe that there's a bigger purpose for me. And that purpose is working with the men and women that struggle every day with these challenges that need some help figuring it out.
So you understand.
One more question. But isn't it a little crazy that you used to be a 1%er, right? And through decision making of your own, you lost that. And now you've come back through this transformative experience, and your sphere of influence is probably 100 times greater than when you were a 1%er.
It's true, Jeff, but you have to understand why that happened. That happened because when I came back to Philadelphia, it wasn't that long ago. It was a little over 3 years ago. I went into a halfway house where I lived for almost a year. And during that period of time, it was one of the most challenging areas of Philadelphia. It was in one of the most impoverished, one of the highest crime rates in North Philadelphia. And I sat and I lived in a halfway house where the challenges of the day were finding a meal to eat. The challenges were getting a pass so that you could get out. I was more incarcerated in that halfway house than I was when I was in prison. And 1 second, the other problem that I had, and I always say this, was that the conditions in the halfway houses around the country are oftentimes so bad that the biggest challenge for me every day, and I swear this is true, was finding toilet paper to wipe my butt. And that's sad. You shouldn't have to come home from prison after 5 years and have to face that kind of challenge. You should come back to a place where people are supportive, where they give you help you get decent living conditions where they help make it a little bit easier for you to try and figure out what your next step is going to be.
I mean, I appreciate your optimism and the way that you sort of pulled yourself together, but it does not escape me that you are white, and that comes with a certain amount of privilege that the majority of the folks that you served time with, I'm sure, were not white. And when they come out, you know, the deck is stacked so far against them that even if they say, you know what, I didn't get hired because I was a felon or I was convicted, there's a whole other host of reasons why they're not hired in concert with being a felon on top of race and ethnicity and culture.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons, so I speak around the country now on criminal justice reform issues, and I'm often asked this question, you know, why do you do it? Why are you there? I spoke in Harlem several months ago with Lisa, and I was up there and they asked that same question. And my response was really simple. They just said, Mr. A, why do you do this? And I said, quite frankly, it's because I'm white, because people listen to me. And when I sit up and I'm in front of the Attorney General and I'm sitting next to the Attorney General and the Secretary of Prisons in Pennsylvania, or I'm in Washington with state senators, they're listening to me because I'm white. And that's the harsh reality of it. And it's a terrible thing, but I need for them to know that the men and women that I serve with that were black and brown are being discriminated against, and this system is stacked against them.
That is the best answer I've heard on this show from anybody, ever.
Thank
That
you.
is the best answer. It is the truth, and you spoke it so beautifully. I really appreciate that. Some people jump around that race conversation and the race issue, but you met it dead on, and I am wholly grateful for that.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about, because Jeffrey's trajectory and mine, they parallel each other in a lot of ways. And we've talked about how we deal with white privilege and how we have to put it on the table and own it and not pretend to be something we're not. I mean, just because we've been to prison doesn't mean that we understand the experience of what it's like to grow up in a black neighborhood and have limited access to opportunities. And the more we own that social location and we're authentic to it, then the more we can engage people as authentic people they are.
But that's not what he's saying.
No.
He's not saying that. What he's saying is because he's white, he's listened to, regardless of, I mean, people like to say black people come from whatever. All of us don't. All of us are not poor. All of us are not from the projects. All of us don't have the same story. But what we have in common is skin color. And so what he's saying is he can walk into spaces and people will listen to him, regardless of where he comes from, that they will listen to him before they listen to anybody.
I look at it like this. I strongly believe that in the saying, you can never judge a book by its cover. And too often we do that all the time. We see somebody on the street and they're sleeping on a grate, and we walk by them and pretend they're invisible. It's like this Harry Potter invisibility cloak. We have a right to just think that people that are homeless don't exist.
Yes.
And that's the same thing with people that are black and brown. We need to open people's books up and read them. There's some remarkable stories. When you read the story of the person who comes home from prison who was incarcerated because he was out running drugs because he had 3 brothers and sisters at home that he was tasked with actually providing for because his parents were heroin addicts or they weren't around or were incarcerated themselves. I mean, those are the stories that make people who they are. And we need to listen to those stories, and we need to figure out how we can help change the dialogue and get them back into a career and out of poverty often.
So you're out, you get out, and what's before you?
Wow. What isn't before me? So it's a whole new life. You know, when you come home from prison, I think the biggest thing for me is just appreciation of everything. Everything I do, I just appreciate. I appreciate underwear that fits. I appreciate a regular toothbrush. I appreciate not having to eat ramen noodles 7 days a week. I appreciate these little things that most people take for granted. Usually when I speak in Philadelphia, especially, I'll go and after almost every lecture I give, I go and get a soft pretzel with mustard. And it's kind of better.
Isn't that nice?
It's kind of better than any steak I've ever eaten because I didn't have it for so long, and now I appreciate it. I don't take those things for granted anymore. Freedom I don't take for granted. And I had this discussion the other day, and maybe, Jeff, you can relate this a little bit. the question came up to me and said, when do you not become a returning citizen or an ex-felon or whatever you want to describe the person as when you leave prison, formerly incarcerated individual? When does that stop? And I tried to explain that I will always be 617-640-66.
I don't know my number.
That's kind of...
I didn't commit it to memory. I don't know it.
You can borrow mine, Babs.
Now I got to go look it up. Like, what was that?
Yeah, so I don't think that ever stops. I think your perspective on life has forever changed. And now you have to take those experiences and you have to find what drives you and what makes you who you are. So I encourage men and women that come home not to hide from it, but to be very transparent and to be open when they're in a job interview, that they need to tell their story. They need people to read their book and to understand their book so that they can get hired, as opposed to hiding from it and thinking that it's going to go away.
And when you say hiding, you mean shame, because shame is such a stopgap for people. Because what happens is you come home and you're so ashamed of what has happened that you really just want to be invisible, but you can't, because you've got to move through the world. You got to get a job if you need to get your kids back, if you need to get housing. So you have to be visible all the while carrying that shame. And I don't know how people sort of figure that out on their way to trying to create a new life for themselves.
Yeah, so, and I think shame is part of it, but there's also a humility that you learn while you're away. Yeah. There's this, let's put it this way. When I know that the sentence that the judge imposed to me of 5 years, that paled in comparison to what I've done to myself over the years. And I've learned that, I have to forgive myself as well.
That's a good point.
Have to move on. And that shame of what I did, and the acts that I committed, those were all for a purpose to get me to where I am today, to the lessons that I've learned. And that's what we have to encourage people, that shame has to be placed in that little bucket. Not that it should be forgotten. It should just be remembered when you go back and you think about doing what you did before. So it's really hard and it's challenging, but more and more people have to be honest and open. And I think society's starting to get it a lot more. We're starting to have these discussions. Gosh, you tell me a time when I could have ever imagined the President of the United States in a State of the Union address actually introducing someone that's just released from prison, and both sides, the House and the Senate, are standing up applauding the person. It wasn't that long ago, President Bill Clinton got a rousing standing ovation for putting people behind bars. Yeah. So times are changing, and now we have to embrace it. As people that are formerly incarcerated, we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to say, you know what? We have skills, we have ability, we have value in society, and we need opportunity. So we're asking for this door to be open wider so that we can get the careers that we want.
So Jeffrey, how much of this did you come to on your own, or how much, for example, was Just Leadership USA part of your understanding that we are in the process of forming a community and we have to stand up for ourselves as a community?
Wow. So it's a great question. I was a Just Leader fellow last year. I finished for last year. And Just Leadership is an incredible organization. Glenn Martin is a friend. And, Glenn has a great saying. He says that if you're not at the table, you're often being served as the meal.
Well, and he was on the show in December. Yeah. So shout out to Glenn for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So it was funny, too, because I used it in Harrisburg recently. I stood up in front of at the Pennsylvania Reentry Council meeting and stood up and said, a friend of mine once said that, if you're not at the table, you're often being served as the meal. And guess what? We're not only at the table, but we're in the kitchen cooking the meal, and we're setting the table, and we're actually sending the invites out. So it's kind of crazy. But Just Leadership had an incredible impact on me. And it was because I looked at the people that were around me and the fellows that I worked with that are across the country, Tara Simmons and some great people that are just changing the face of criminal justice reform in this country, and working with them and knowing that when I travel across the country, I can go to just about any state and find a Just Leader fellow who's gone and traveled down this path before and now is dedicated their life to really changing the system. But if there's one thing that I've learned out of Just Leadership, it was really looking at myself and taking self-responsibility for everything that happens. When I leave a meeting now, or I leave this radio show today, the first thing I do is I go to myself and say, how'd you do, Jeff? And what could you have done better? And what's your thought? So
that's very Oprah.
Yeah.
Oprah does that.
is.
She
Yeah.
does. She
Yeah.
does. She's like, what is this moment teaching me, or what has this moment taught me?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. So tell me about the JEVS program.
So I came to JEVS in September.
What does it do?
And JEVS is an amazing organization in Philadelphia. It's a social service agency that touches well over 35,000 people in Philadelphia alone. JEVS is a very diverse organization. It's been around for years. And we do everything from own our own methadone clinics in Philadelphia to own Orleans Technical College, where we provide training and support for people that are going back and trying to get into career opportunities. We have a home health care network. We also do contracts with the Philadelphia prison system, where we're educating men and women behind the walls so that they can get a credential, and then when they come home, help them get placed. We do reentry support. JEVS has about 35 programs that are truly amazing. And the thing about JEVS is we also own and operate the Career One Stop, which is we call it Career Link in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. And we service all men and women that are challenged with employment issues, where they need to get back into the workforce. So it's a very diverse social service agency that gets it. They came to me in September and said, Jeff, look, we have these great programs, but we often work in silos. And we understand that a lot of people that are on drug and alcohol addiction programs also have criminal backgrounds. And many people on welfare have criminal backgrounds. And there are people in our colleges that have criminal backgrounds. We need to break down the silos. We need to figure out how we can service them better. And I said, bring it on. So they brought me into this position where I go around and I work with all of our different partners and agencies and say, look, this is how we can service returning citizens a little bit better. And this is how we can get them into a career opportunity. So for me, it's about careers. It's about trying to change someone's life forever. And JEVS gets it. They're an incredible organization that brought me on at an executive level, where I could never have imagined sitting in this chair or the office that I sit in now and doing the work that I do.
So, Jeff, how much do you think it's because that you live and you grew up and you're working in Philadelphia, which is probably the hub right now of enlightened criminal justice reform? I mean, not every city is Philadelphia. Certainly in Connecticut, we have a lot of challenges. And you read about Philadelphia reform movement every day in the criminal justice press.
Yeah, I think somewhat because we are being looked at nationally.
Yeah.
As to criminal justice reform, we have a DA who's very progressive in Philadelphia, who's making changes in bail reform and other things. So I think that's part of it. I think it's also that we're right. It's just the right time for an organization like JEVS and other social service agencies to step up and start working in the reentry world and criminal justice world and social justice issues, and start looking at diversion programs for our youth, which we have, and looking at drug and alcohol diversion and different kinds of support programs, and then marrying that with career development so that we can get people into sustainable jobs and sustainable wages. Unfortunately, the time of just putting someone in a job at a minimum wage just doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
And I challenge anyone out there just to try and survive on a minimum wage.
And that's anybody, regardless of the fact if you've served time. That's just anybody working. You can't make it on minimum wage anywhere in this country.
Yeah, so my passion has found in my little niche. I took a seat in September on the Coalition on Basic Adult Education, which is a national organization that actually advocates on behalf of educators and administrators in the adult education world. And they tasked me with coming in the prison reform and creating this commission for prison literacy. And it's both behind and beyond the walls. And we recently formed the committee across the country. So now we have 24 states represented with some rock stars throughout the country in adult literacy, and very diverse, from returning citizens to prison wardens to politicians.
And what are y'all
judges.
charged to do?
And we're charged to try and make a change when it comes to educating the men and women behind the walls, so that they're better prepared when they come home. I have yet to get a good answer from anyone as to why we don't teach in every single prison in our country
I
digital
agree.
literacy.
I swear to God, because that's a captive audience already, right?
We say to people when they come home, go get a job, go get a job. And the first thing they got to do is they have to apply online to get a job. Men and women oftentimes that have never used a mouse before, they're looking around the floor for where the mouse is. And we want them to get a job online. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. And yet we have the ability to do it safely and securely and to teach people while they're away. There's just no good reason.
Well, yet there is pushback from people in groups who will say, why are we giving resources to people in prison when we're not giving resources to people who are law-abiding citizens and they're suffering economic realities?
The reality is, Jeff, we spend $80 billion in our criminal justice system. $80 billion for men and women behind bars. So would we rather spend $10,000 educating the men and women when they come home, or do we want to continue to spend $50,000 progressively every year to keep them behind bars? It doesn't make financial sense anymore for us to just ignore the population and think it's going to go away by tucking them in a prison. We need to start thinking about how we educate and train the men and women behind the walls so that when they come home, they can be productive again. Otherwise, society fails. And this is a societal issue. This isn't a black and white issue. This is a problem for everyone. And we have to understand that first, and then we start dealing with the solutions.
So it's really a complicated problem because you're dealing with issues of empathy and compassion and humanity, and at the same time economic realities and what drives our taxes and how we can spend our money appropriately, and weaving that together. I'm sure that's a huge challenge for you.
It is a really difficult challenge because the reality is that there are men and women that deserve to spend time in prison and to be punished, myself included. That we deserve punishment. We deserve something away. But we also, with 95% of those people incarcerated coming home, we need to do a better job of preparing people for when that happens. Otherwise, it's that revolving prison pipeline that's just going to continue.
Yes, I agree. So talk a little bit about what's next for you. Is there some next for you?
Yeah.
Or next for the movement. If you don't want to be, if you don't know what's next for you, what's next for the movement?
Well, he looks like he might answer that.
Maybe.
So there's a lot of things that are next for me, and I think the bottom line for me is to continue following my passion, which is working with men and women
How about a book?
that need to support.
Is there a book in you?
So there's a book in the works.
I thought so. I can feel it.
There's a book in the works. There's also a lot of creative different programming that I'm looking at. I met yesterday and had a discussion with SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, and we were invited to their diversity and inclusion program in New Orleans this year, and we're going to be doing a program, reentry simulation, where we can show human relation HR specialists exactly what it means when you have a criminal background and you're trying to get a job and how difficult it is. So those kinds of things, it's education for me. It's going out and speaking to people and letting them know my story and letting them try to understand that there's a talent pool out there of people. And there's also a need right now for people to be compassionate and understanding, and that we have to learn to forgive at some point in time. And that doesn't mean forget. It just means to forgive enough to allow people to come back into society and find their life again. I was blessed with having that opportunity, and we need to make sure men and women know that when they come home, they're welcome.
Jeffrey, how much of the your message is received well by, say, blue state, red state, or by the coasts, which are generally more progressive than the interior of the country? So where do you find that you're most and least successful?
So, it's interesting, but I was in Washington recently and at a meeting with representatives from Koch brothers, and they actually have engaged SHRM in this discussion and were announced recently that they're leading their charge for a campaign this year to hire returning citizens. So they're getting involved at an industry-wide level. I think the one place that's the hardest is just in the industry, the business sector, the industry sector, understanding that they need to open that door wider. And that means a lot of things, and oftentimes it means training and skill development. You know, they say that within the next 10 years, 45% of all the jobs that exist today won't be around. So where do the people today sit in the entry-level positions? We have to start thinking ahead, and that means giving them computer skills and literacy skills so that they can keep up with the times, because otherwise those people are going to be just rolling around.
I mean, I see it already, because the low-paying jobs, you know, the McDonald's and the fast food industry, they've already moved toward robotic, digital kinds of, we got a new Wendy's up on Whaley Avenue where they have no people running it. Like, you have to drive up and you go to a kiosk, and then there's like minimum. Like, I remember that was people's high school kids' first point of entry to the workforce was fast food restaurants. And now you're starting to see more automation where they are not needed.
Yeah, so what we need to do is we need to train people to fix those machines.
Yes, or create those machines, or develop those machines.
So, Jeffrey, across the country, what are you finding that the level of technology, available technology in the prisons is? And is it how limited it is? What are the security risks? And what are you working for in terms of kind of interconnectivity?
Yes, there's a bunch of things. One is we want to see more use of tablets at a reasonable cost. Right now, we believe, just like with the phone system inside the prison system, it's ridiculously expensive. And I just was reading an article this morning about Connecticut and and how much they charge for prison phone calls in Connecticut. And I'll tell you, it's absurd. It just doesn't make sense, because it's the people, the family members that are actually flipping that bill.
The most vulnerable people paying this exorbitant amount of money to talk to their loved ones is shameful.
So if anyone wants to read that article, you can find it on the Criminal Justice Insider Facebook page.
There you go.
And it's by Venice Michelson.
She's been on our show.
She's a guest of ours too. And she reached out and she wanted to publish that article. So it's out there today.
Yeah, so tablets, I think, are a great way of getting access to men and women in the digital literacy world, where they can start using a computer a little bit, and they can start getting familiar with how to drag and drop and use. So I think that's a big way. I think we need to do more when it comes to education behind the walls. I think we need to open up Pell Grants again, so that men and women can start getting college classes while they're away, or at least credits for college classes. I think on the outside, ban the box in education is a big deal. We have to start thinking about how we open the door for more opportunities for people with a criminal background. Right now, one of my biggest pushes is regarding licensing. The licensing restrictions for occupations for returning citizens and people that have been through the criminal justice system are insane. In Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, we have a law that you can't be a barber. You can't get a barber renewal, which is incredible, considering that 85% of the barbers in Philadelphia have some past.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't make
That's
any
a big deal. I think we have something very similar here.
We do.
To that same end. And people had to individually petition and go through the thing so that they could get their license.
So there's a lot of work that can be done. We need to start chipping away at some of the things that have just been ingrained in our system that now we have an opportunity to sort of change. I also think that probation and parole has to be looked at again. We cannot go into a society where putting an ankle bracelet on everyone is a solution. It just isn't.
It's just prison outside prison, right?
It is.
It is worse than
that.
And
I don't even. What is the point of it? Like, what is? Because I had an ankle bracelet for 5 months, and it was just the most ridiculous thing. Not because I don't think I deserved it, but I didn't understand the point of it. Like, I was no flight risk. I wasn't a drug dealer. I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a mom trying to get kids to school and all this other kind of stuff. There was no point to it. And, every time you go to when I go see my federal probation officer, they had on the wall how much it cost to, like, monitor me and, anybody, how much it cost. And it was some ridiculous amount of money. And I thought, boy, that's money that could be used in some other way to sort of do some other kinds of positive things.
Yeah, electronic monitoring across the system is not really the answer. It doesn't really solve the problem. But we have to look at the sentences, the supervision we put on people. In the state system, many times, people are serving longer time on probation or parole than they are in their sentence.
Sure.
Yeah. And that just doesn't make any sense. It's just ripe for people to find ways to violate and go back into the system. So there's a lot of work that can be done.
We have a friend down in Atlanta who was sentenced to 15 years in prison, served 3, and the rest of it on parole and probation. So she's given parole and probation for a decade.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And depending on who your probation officer is, might not grace you with, some leeway around violation and what can be done and hauling you back to jail and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, how was your probation experience?
Oh wow.
We got Jeffrey Abramowitz to stop talking. Oh my God.
We did. I'm still on probation. I'm still on supervised release. So I'll be kind. No, I'll be kind. But honestly, it's been good for me in the sense that they've given me some leeway to do the work that I do. So I'm grateful for that. But I'm going to tell you quite frankly, I'm still on supervised release. It sits on my mind 24/7.
Yeah.
I wake up every morning knowing that I have to be careful of what I do
and where you go,
where I go,
who you see, and who you talk to, and
so I'm really mindful of it, and it weighs heavy on me. So I'm looking forward. I'll be off of supervised release in July.
Okay,
and I'm looking forward to it.
Off paper,
but it doesn't change. It's not going to change my life. It's not going to stop me from doing anything different. Or any. Really hasn't been a lot of restrictions for me in that respect. But it plays psychologically with you, and that's the big thing. And I realize, so you're gonna not think this is a little bit weird, but every time a police car comes behind me, I get a little bit
I'm the same way.
Oh, yeah.
And I am exactly the same way. But for a whole lot of different reasons. but I feel exactly what you mean. I feel the anxiety of that.
I go through an airport and I get chills up my spine. I get sweats when I go through security.
Sure.
And it's not that I don't have legal right to be there or I don't have passes to go where I'm going. It has nothing to do with that. It's just psychologically, there's somebody there that I know that can restrain me and put me back to where I was. And that scares the pants off me.
What people don't know is because your probation's in Philadelphia, right?
Yes.
And you're in Connecticut now, and if you get pulled over by a policeman for speeding or for illegal lane change, and they run you, you have the potential to wind up in jail because you are active probation.
Correct.
And then your getting out of that jail is a function of communication with probation officers and things like that.
Yeah, and oftentimes can be weeks or months before anything happens. They just put you back into the system, and it's scary. It is very much scary. And now I do get requests. I mean, I put in my requests for travel when I have to, because for work and to do shows like this. But I get it. I get it all too well, and I don't know that it will ever go away. But I will tell you that it's a scary.
Well, it hasn't, because I've been out 10 years, so.
Yeah.
It gets better. It gets better.
No, not for me. It hasn't. No. I still feel it. I mean, I feel it as a black woman because, police have taken agency with us. And I feel it as a convicted felon because I know when they run that, it's going to come up. Like, it comes up. And depending on whoever is pulling me over, and I haven't been pulled over. I'm just saying, I feel it every time I'm driving and I feel free, but there are those moments where I'm like,
I have to be honest that the clergy plates help a lot.
So I got to go back to rabbinical school, I think.
Well, this is why you have Lisa with you, so she can drive.
So tell us before we go, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah. What
does the self-care look like for you? Because you've been through a lot. Have you healed things with family? Have you made peace with parts of your life or all of your life, or?
Well, you throw this off. You throw those hard questions at the very end. So I'm going to tell you a story, and then self-care is hard, especially now because I'm so passionate about what I do, that if I could do it 23 out of 24 hours and sleep 1 hour, I would do it. But I'll tell you, when it comes to family, it's been a challenge. I have a great, amazing brother. My sister's been kind of estranged since this has all happened. My dad passed when I came home, although I got to spend some time with him. But I have an incredible daughter, and last Father's Day, 2 Father's Days ago, I was the first time I was off supervised release. And I tell the story sometimes, but I tell it for a different reason that I do today. My daughter took me for my Father's Day gift, and she got me in the car, and we took a drive.
Rachel, right?
Rachel,
yeah.
Took a drive back to the high school where she graduated, and got out of the car, and I said, okay, where's my present? I was expecting a package or something, I don't know. She said, get out of the car. I said, are you leaving me? And she said, no, just get out of the car. And she went to the trunk and took out her cap and gown and the award she got at graduation. And we went out into the football field and took some photographs and then sat at the 50-yard line and talked. And we really talked about my experience. And she talked about her experience and what she went through while I was away because I wasn't at her graduation. And I'll tell you, I can't say honestly that not being at the actual graduation would have been incredible, but that day was kind of priceless. I encourage people, and I look for these opportunities. We can never turn back the hands of time and go back for all the things that we've missed before. But that doesn't mean that we can't reenact them and that we can't sort of bring them to the present and say, this is what it's all about today. So when it comes to self-care, it's about appreciating my family a lot more, giving, my daughter a little extra hug, appreciating the women that are around me and the people that are around me today. So I'm really blessed, but the message that I want people to know is that there's opportunity for everyone. You are the one that it starts with, and you have to make that decision yourself that you want to change, that you want to better yourself, and that you want to find that special place that makes you happy. And then run with it as fast and as hard as you can, because the train's never going any slower than it is right now. And just run with it and find your passion in life. And that's what happiness is all about.
But Jeffrey, we're on this call almost weekly together. Most weeks we're together, but certainly not everybody is able to embrace that. Why do you think that is? Do you think that that most of the resistance that we find is really self-imposed?
And there's no question in my mind. This is all a matter of mind over matter. You have to change. You have to change it in your head. You have to decide in your head and in your mind that I'm going to succeed, that I'm going to put the past behind me. This is part of who I am, and I'm better than that. I know it. And I can prove it. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and change the world, or my little piece of it. And if I do it one day at a time or one person at a time, I have to do it myself.
And I think it's important to point out that although all of us in this room are in various forms of criminal justice advocacy or programs, that you, when you're saying that, you're not advocating that people turn to criminal justice work so that they can find their authenticity or their passion, but whatever calls out to them is the right thing.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that. It's not just the criminal justice world. It can be, if you wanted to always be an artist, you should go and try and be an artist. Yeah. I mean, find what gets you motivated, what gets you up and get you going in the morning. That's what it becomes all about.
And look, I want to go open up a Jamba Juice. I'm going to do that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeff Abramowitz, Executive Director for Reentry Services for JEVS Human Services in Philadelphia. It is a pleasure having you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We hope
Thank
you can
so
come back.
much.
And people can listen to him in Philadelphia on tell them where they can hear you.
Yeah, we're on WPPM 106.5 FM, and it's called Looking Forward, and it's every 2 weeks, every other Wednesday from 5 to 6 at night, and we talk criminal justice reform and reentry work, and we have some great discussions about this whole topic we've been talking about.
I appreciate that.
Why don't you tell people how to reach you and what JEVS' website is and things like that?
So it's jevs.www.jevs.org is the website. And you can reach me at Jeffrey, Jeffrey.Abramowitz, Abramowitz. Just Google me. At jevs.org. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place. But if you search, you'll find me.
You better spell JEVS. Just
JEVS.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Babs, another great show.
Another great
Wonderful.
show. Next week, we have, March 1st, we have the new commissioner of
Roland Cook is going to be here.
The new Connecticut Commission of what is it?
He's the corrections commissioner.
Yes, the corrections commissioner,
and
for the state of Connecticut. So he'll be on March 1st.
I'm not sure, but this might be his first interview since taking that role. And
well, it'd be very nice.
If that's true, then good for us.
Yes. Yes. So thank you, Andrew Kaplan.
And thank you, Lynn, and love you, Babs. Thank you
for
a wonderful
too, Jeff.
show.
Today's show is brought to you by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
Thank you. We'll be back. We'll see y'all. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Jeffrey.